Waste exports and the effects on the environment have been a major environmental issue that us Americans have not brought to the forefront. It's time we talk about it. The first thing we need to do is figure out what is waste exporting. The simple answer is it's shipping waste that is considered to be recycled to other countries for processing. The US ships up to 430 large shipping containers a day filled with plastic waste to other countries, most of which do not have a manageable recycling center that can handle it. Sending recyclable waste is a cost-effective way for the US to save money on its recycling issues. It might cost $3,000 for a 24-ton container, or one shipping container, to be shipped from Hong Kong to Los Angeles filled with iPhones and Nike shoes. But the return journey filled with recyclables and waste could be as low as $400. US waste exports are sent to Indonesia, India, Vietnam, Malaysia, and China. So why is waste exporting such a major threat? The hard truth is that less than 10% of recycled plastics end up actually recycled. The US represents just 4% of the world's population, but it produces 12% of the global waste. By shipping waste overseas to countries that can't handle it, it's sold to small villages or pop-up recycling shops that run illegally. These shops don't follow any sort of regulations. They wash and melt the plastics, sometimes even in their own home, which is not only bad for the people who live there, but also uses a lot of water and energy. The extra materials are burned, creating massive amounts of toxic gases that affect them, the neighboring communities, wildlife, and biodiversity. What's going to happen if the US doesn't find a way to export waste? Cost of recycling will increase. Countries that would have paid us for our waste to keep up their cheap manufacturing, now we have to pay them to take it. US communities will not meet their recycling goals, with the worst case scenario being that recycling programs stop because of the price of the programs. All waste, including recyclable plastic, will go straight to the landfills. If the US doesn't find a way to deal with the waste, then it will end up in the landfills and eventually the ocean. Globally, more than 2.1 metric tons of waste are generated each year, enough to fill 822,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Only 16% of that waste is recycled. Imagine all that waste floating in the ocean, contaminating our fish and ocean life. There are two major flaws that cause this to happen, including the fact that rules are confusing about what can be recycled and what can't, and 80% of mixed plastics are getting sent abroad because it's too costly to deal with, and how dirty it can be. This issue is watched closely, and there's a lot of organizations that are following the waste export issue. And more than 100 investigations and reports have shown that major problems do exist in the waste export process. Trade commissions keep track of what is shipped out of the country, as well as the US Census Bureau data tracks the imports and exports in and out of the US. Although the numbers that we have are not completely accurate because of the waste market that's going on illegally. Data that is also tracked is where we are sending our waste. This chart shows the countries that we are sending our waste to that have poor waste management in them. So what is happening to the countries that we're sending waste to? Major issues in these countries include climate change. There are millions of tons of carbon emitted into the air from the burning of plastic. Food chain contamination. Animals graze on the large mounds of waste and will ingest the plastic and toxins that are in it. These animals are later either milked or butchered to feed the people. The toxins are then transferred to the people through their food. So basically, people are eating contaminated food, even if it's freshly butchered. Health and safety impacts to workers and communities. Potential transmission from post-consumer plastic waste. The plastic waste piles are inviting mosquito breeding, which some can carry dengue fever or other diseases. Manual sorting can expose workers to COVID-19 as shipments take less than 14 days. Any exposure of COVID-19 that's on some of these bottles, whether we have found out if it can be transferred or not, could be on there. As you see in these pictures, some of the plastics are just mounds of them. Countries are starting to realize how big this problem has become and are following China's lead in reducing what waste they will take. China has reduced imports by 96% and banned 24 different types of plastics, and insists that the plastic that they do get is perfectly sorted with only a 0.5% contamination. According to US recycling centers, this is not possible to have such low contamination percentages. They also stopped taking mixed paper because there are too much that was included that could not be recycled. Since 2017 to 2018, Malaysia and other countries have picked up the slack for China, but are starting to institute more restrictions. Vietnam has increased by 1,370% in 2018 because of China's decision to stop importing waste. Vietnam thought it was doing better by taking more waste in for its manufacturing, when in fact it's hurting their country and their environment. The long-term environmental effects of waste exporting. The recyclable pop-up shops and the ones that don't follow regulations are illegally tapping into groundwater and then dump the contaminated water back into the ground or waterways, affecting biodiversity. Leftover recyclables that can't be processed are dumped into oceans illegally or burned with their noxious fumes, polluting neighborhoods and sickening residents. And as I mentioned earlier, the food chain is and will be affected. The animals feed on the plastic mounds, sickening themselves and eventually the people when they eat them. The effects on the people are given to their children when born, and the cycle goes on. If we take no action, by 2050 there will be more plastic bottles in the ocean than fish. After talking about what waste export is, why it's bad, and how it's affecting our environment, the big question is, what are we doing to solve the problem? The trend China started on regulations has started to impact other countries, both in a good way that they're instilling their own regulations and bad for some that are taking on more imports of waste. Overall, exporting has reduced from 2.5 million metric tons in 2015 to just 1.07 million metric tons in 2018. But this isn't good enough. Bottom line is that less waste means less plastic in the ocean and in our waterways. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act of 2020 will be put into action as of January 2022 that will phase out the use and how certain plastics are recycled. They will also be putting into action further restrictions of waste exports to other countries. Thank you for taking the time to learn about how each bottle of water you drink or piece of plastic packaging you throw away is a job for some people, but also is a death sentence to others. Let's work together to keep our Earth healthy. There's a ton of information on this topic. I encourage you to look up some of these resources for more information.